All right, you see the stream now? It should be up. And hopefully it should, I don't know, try refreshing. Okay, good. Cool. All right, I think hopefully that doesn't come through now. All right, I'm gonna kind of get it actually started here in just a couple minutes, and I think I mentioned, so it will be a few minutes where I'm gonna go through like our standard like Java news and announcements, and then I'll have it where we're both on, where we're kind of just talk for a moment, just so I can introduce you, and then I will hand it off to you to give your presentation. looks like so far right now we have about 20 people concurrently viewing. So hopefully it'll maybe get a few more, but we did get pretty decent participation last time, like people would ask questions and everything. So that's always good. Yes, that's correct. I think I have, for a second the audio was coming through, but I think I got that turned off now. I think. I hope. uh, I, something like that's probably a little bit better than just the standard green screen. Okay. Yeah, I know there's some people, and I don't know how to do it, where you can have it to where you have no background, and then it's a little bit easier because, like, I kind of have to crop it to where it'll have both you and your desktop in there. Whereas if it just had nothing behind you and just your actual desktop, that's a little bit easier. But we don't have to worry about that for right now. All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Billy Carando. I think we're going to ahead and try getting started here. So I'll be here with Micah, and he's going to be doing a presentation on Spring Boot and Vue.js. But before that begins, we will kind of go through our standard Java news, just kind of get an idea of what's going on with Java and how all that stuff is going. Let's see. So, as always, we want to thank all of our sponsors, Pivotal, YRC, even though they're not hosting us right now. We know once, hopefully all this quarantine ends, they will go back to hosting us. And of course, we just want to thank them for also historically hosting us all the same. And of course, Okta for bringing Micah to present today. So this month in Java news, not a whole lot going on. So Java 14 was released right before or just last month. And so now we're on to Java 15. And so for that, we have the removal of Nashorn, which is the embedded JavaScript engine in Java. So that's going to be a pretty big change. So like I said, that's coming in Java 15. Also, text block, which was added first in Java 13 as a preview, is going to probably should be moving out of preview here with Java 15. They're going to be adding hidden classes. That's more of a thing for frameworks. And they're also going to be adding a couple of new garbage collectors as well for options. So for releases, we have a few releases this past month. So we have test containers 1.14.0. If you haven't heard about test containers, it's a really great tool for doing integration testing, and I would highly recommend checking that out. Also, forgot to include this in last month's release notes, but Spring 5.3 was released, so you can check that out. Also, Spring Tools Suite 4.6.0. And finally, Spring Authorization Server as well. In other news, so we have a conferences coming up, Failover Conf, which is April 21st. So check that out at that link. Also, if you look in the description for this video, you'll see a link to the slide deck so you can have everything available. Um, I forgot to get all the upcoming meetups coming are put in uh, into this, but many of our local meetups have started going um, online and virtual like we have. So definitely be sure to continue to kind of check in to see what they're doing and view. That does definitely mean a whole lot to us when people actually show up to view, because that helps us continue to bring in great speakers like Micah. So I guess it's because there's a bit of delay. It's about a 30-second delay between when I'm talking and then when you actually see it. So I'll kind of skip this to anything we missed for right now. But if you do have anything else you want us to share, definitely put about in the chat. And of course, put any questions you have for Micah in the chat as well. He will be watching the chat stream, as will I. So definitely just put that there, and we will make sure we can share those questions with him as they come up. And also, here's some information on getting involved. We're still always looking for speakers. Follow us on KCJUG. And if you have any feedback, we also have a form for that as well. All right. Hopefully, audio is working for you, Micah, now.
How's it going? Can you hear me?
I think so. It shows that it's picking up, so hopefully it's picking up here. I will check with...
We'll find out in about 30 seconds.
Oh, exactly. So hopefully I'll see from my fellow organizers that the audio is coming through. But while I kind of wait for that confirmation, thank you for coming to join us. We actually had to move you up here a month, and so thank you for being very understanding about that. 1 second. So thank you for being understanding about that, because I know changing our times for presentations can be pretty crazy, but yeah, luckily you're able to do that. So if you want, just give like a brief introduction to yourself as well.
Yeah, sure. I actually have slides for that. So shall I dive into it, or was there other stuff you wanted to kick off?
You know what? I'll go ahead and give you full control, and yeah, you can do that so that way I don't mess up too much with how you want to do your presentation. So with that, I will hand it off to Micah, and he can talk to us about Spring Boot and Vue.js.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Early evening for me, I guess late afternoon for you. I'm here in sunny Virginia Beach. And I was with you in person a few years ago. I think it's 2017 when I was there, and wish I could be with you in person now, but that's the way it is. Hopefully sometime in the future, I'll be able to come back out there. On my screen, you should see my presentation. Is that being shared now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So on the lower left, there's a QR code that if you grab that, it'll take you over to a GitHub repo that has this slide deck as well as a bunch of resources that we're going to cover tonight. I have this QR code on the next slide and on the very last slide. So if you don't get it right now, don't sweat it. When we get to the Q&A section, I'll just leave that last slide up. I'm a senior security hacksaw for Okta. That is my official title. It's on my business cards, and I'm happy about that. And tonight we're going to be talking about Vue.js and Spring Boot, but I did bury the lead a little bit, and that is when we get into modern SPAs, we're going to be switching over to JHipster, and we'll see kind of some of the nice features and functionality that JHipster offers over just kind of hand rolling a Vue.js and Spring Boot app. Just a little bit about me. I contribute pretty regularly to Okta's blog. I tend to focus on OpenID Connect and OAuth. I'm a member of our developer workshop team that's run by my colleague Aaron Parecki. But I also contribute to open source projects like the Java JWT project, which is something that I'm proud of. I got to co-author this book, Mastering Enterprise Java Beans, just in time for Enterprise Java Beans 3 to be irrelevant, thanks to Spring and later on Spring Boot and JPA and all the good stuff that we enjoy today. But it's still a project that I am proud of. A little bit more background, very briefly, about me and my history through programming languages. It goes back to 1980. So, first, I want to invite you to get off my lawn. And second of all, I started with BASIC like a lot of us back in the 80s and had to be a little bit deprogrammed. When I got to college, my college had a Pascal based computer science program. Fortunately for me, in my sophomore year, we switched over to C. And I'm grateful for that because while I've done a lot of C, I have never done a single thing in Pascal professionally. Fast forward a bit, in 1995, when Java was released, I saw something special there. Even though I had never really touched an object-oriented language up to that point, I was intrigued and I jumped right in, and Java has really been my main squeeze ever since. But soon after, I got into JavaScript because it got added to our browsers and there were all kinds of security problems. And I wanted to figure out what kind of new and interesting ways that I could interact. Hopefully, we're all familiar with Servlet and Spring Boot. Those came along. You can see a little blip on the radar there for Ruby. I had that for just a moment at a company that was a Ruby shop, and 3 weeks after I joined and ramped up learning Ruby so I could get the job, they switched over to Node.js. And I'm kind of grateful for that because that really got me a level of depth with JavaScript that I didn't have up to that point. And you can see the framework that I have the least experience with is Vue.js, but I know just enough now to be dangerous. But more importantly, I have a couple of production apps that are Vue.js front ends, Spring Boot backends, and Vue.js has allowed me, a real backend dweller, usually to create a functional, if not necessarily pretty, front end for a bunch of apps that I've written. So we're going to start with a very simple Spring Boot API, and we're kind of going to leave Spring Boot there. We'll spend about 5 minutes on that, and we'll reuse that throughout the rest, where we shift the focus really to Vue.js and then JHipster, and then layering in components and security. We're going to use a pile of technology along the way. We've got Node.js, Java, Spring Boot, Vue, JHipster, Docker, Heroku. These are all going to be in the mix as we go. And I have references for all of this technology in that GitHub repo that I referenced earlier, and I'll have that QR code up again at the end. So Spring Boot in 5 minutes. Most of us, I would assume, are familiar with this, but if you've never seen the Spring Initializer, it's an amazing project, and it gives us a lot of different ways to skin the cat to get started with a Spring Boot project. Their web interface is great, but you can also interact with it, the API directly from the command line, and it's even integrated into a lot of IDEs like IntelliJ. Where we're going to start is simply to use curl, and we're going to end up with a tarball that we can then expand and drop right into IntelliJ. And among other things, we're going to give it a list of dependencies that we care about. And the only dependency I'm giving it to start off with is the web dependency. We're just going to create a very simple RESTful API to get the ball rolling here. So I'm going to do that right now. I'll go and grab my tarball, and most of what I'm going to be doing tonight is live coding, so that's always dangerous, but we'll see how we do. I have a couple of tricks up my sleeve if anything goes horribly wrong. But now I've expanded this tarball, and you can see that I'm all ready to go with my Spring Boot project. And now I'm going to open it up in IntelliJ, and I can do that simply by referencing the POM file that it created. I chose to do a Maven project. It would work just as well with Gradle. I'm going to open it as a project. It'll take just a moment to recognize it and get set up and compile it as a project, but it goes pretty quick because there's really nothing here yet. The only thing that we have here is our progress application, which I could fire up and it would run right now, but there's not a lot going on here. Now, just as a side note, if you're an IntelliJ user and either for your actual main programming or if you do presentations like I do, you really want to get familiar with live templates because it allows you to do things like this. I have a little tag called boot progress, and it drops in this little code snippet so that you don't have to watch me live type terribly. But we are going to go over this code snippet. Let me just make it a little bigger. And this is our very simple API. We are emulating something that would take some time and make a progress meter fill itself up as it went. And so our API is very simple. It's going to be listening at the API progress endpoint. And we want to add one little thing, one little annotation here to indicate that this is going to be a REST controller. So it's listening on API project. It's going to return a map of string and object. That's our little clue that this is going to be a JSON response. In real life, we probably want a POJO that would get serialized and deserialized thanks to Jackson, but we're going to keep it super simple. You can also see that it has a request parameter that is not required called %, and we're going to set that up as an optional integer. And we're going to use the collections helper method here, singleton map. The key is going to be progress, and the value is going to be whatever we passed in +5, or it'll end up being 0. If we don't pass in a % parameter, it's going to set that value to -5, add 5 to it, which will end up making it 0. So pretty straightforward. Let's watch this run, and then I will interact with it. This will take just a second to fire up Spring Boot. There we go. Now I'm going to use a command line program called HTTPy. It's a modern curl replacement. It has a terse command line syntax, and it is particularly effective in working with RESTful APIs. It automatically will format and syntax color RESTful or JSON responses. So you could use curl just fine here, but I like HTTPy because it makes it look nice. And now you can see when I don't pass in anything, it returns 0. And if I do pass in something, it's just simply going to add 5 to it. It'll add 5 to whatever I pass in. So we're emulating a progress meter. And really, this is kind of the end or almost the end of what we're going to do with Spring Boot, because the main event is going to be visualizing a progress meter with Vue.js. So let's take a first pass at Vue.js. Prior to this presentation, I did a global install for the Vue CLI and the CLI service. I'm going to create a project using TypeScript. That's an option that I have with Vue.js, and I'm doing that for 2 reasons. One is TypeScript gives us nice, strongly typed language construct and syntax for JavaScript. Also, JHipster, we're going to see later on, when you use the JHipster Vue.js blueprint, your only option is TypeScript. So we're going to start out with TypeScript so that we keep it consistent. I'm also going to install 2 additional libraries. One is Bootstrap Vue. That gives us a nice integration with Vue.js for Bootstrap. Bootstrap is great for backend dwellers like myself because it gives me some nice components, including a progress meter that would take me way too long to figure out because I am really horrible with CSS. And then Axios is kind of the de facto HTTP client for use with Vue.js and others. So jumping back here, I'm going to say Vue create progress front end. That's going to set me up with a Vue.js project, and I have a bunch of things that I'm going to choose here. I see audio is going in and out. Not sure if there's anything we can do about that. I just glanced at the chat window. So I'm going to manually select some features, and I'm doing that because in this case, TypeScript is not selected by default. Now I could change the Vue CLI to make TypeScript the default, but I haven't done that so that I could show you me selecting TypeScript. Once I select TypeScript, everything else I'm going to set as the default. So I'm just going to kind of fly through this. Now it's going to create my Vue.js project. Now this takes a little while, not that long, but a little while. So we're not going to wait for it. I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to open up a preset project. It's a little like watching a cooking show where I have the thing in the oven that's already done. So I'm going to jump over to preset here, and I'm going to go to progress front end. And in IntelliJ, I can just open up this folder and it will recognize it as a Vue.js project and give me some nice syntax highlighting and some other niceties from IntelliJ. Now it's showing me right here I can use Yarn to run this. And so what I have is a basic boilerplate Vue.js project here. So I'm just going to fire it up. This will take just a moment. It's going to do the Webpack business. And now it's running on port 8081. And if I jump over to my browser, there is my kind of default boilerplate Vue.js project. All right, now the next thing I want to do here is to layer in communication with our Spring Boot backend. So we're going to use Axios to make an API call. Axios uses promises, super handy. Promise is just an async process that when we call it returns immediately, and then we can write our code to handle the resolution of that promise, and our code is nice and neat. So Axios will call the Spring Boot backend. We're going to see in just a minute that we need to deal with CORS, that's cross-origin resource sharing. And if you're not familiar with that, I'll explain it a little bit, but it's somewhat outside the scope of this presentation. But there's just some housekeeping that we're going to have to deal with in order to make this work properly, to be able to call from our Vue.js front end to our Spring Boot backend. All right, so let's jump into our app view.
Hey,
Vue.
Micah, we're getting a bit of static in your audio. I don't know if you want to check your connection on your microphone real quick or something. Sorry about that.
No worries. Let me do this. I have, fortunately, a couple of other microphones. So let me switch to a different one and we'll see if that's better. This one is usually super clear and reliable. Let's see how we do. Hold on one sec. Bringing in another mic. All right. How's that?
It may be coming in on my side. One moment.
All right. We call this the demo monster. If we get the audio worked out, I'll bring back the other mic because it's actually better, but
Okay,
we'll
actually
roll with
bring
it.
back that other mic, and it
All right.
could just be purely within my headset.
All right. I did see it in the chat. Was that you in the chat that was saying
That
that?
was something else. So
Okay.
sorry about that.
All right.
Sorry everyone. I will hop back off now to give the full control back to Micah. So I think you should be able to continue just fine.
Okay. Sweet. Okay, so in our app view file, that's Vue, but it is a front end view, we have a template and we also have code that backs that template that's essentially empty right now. Now, one of the cool things about the Vue.js lifecycle is that we get this when the page or when the view is fully ready to work, it will call one time this mounted function automatically. So we can just add the mounted function to this app class and be confident that it will be called automatically. Now it's complaining right now because I haven't brought Axios into scope here. So let me do that. There we go. And if you look at what's going on here, it's going to use Axios to make a GET request to this endpoint. That is our Spring Boot backend. It's just going to pass in 10. We would expect to get back 15 as a response. And it's going to use this then function call. We pass that function call a handler. And so when the promise is resolved, It'll get the response, and we're just going to output that JSON response. Pretty straightforward. Nothing visual yet. We're going to be able to see this console log in the browser window. So let me open up the developer tools, and this should automatically reset itself. And right away, we can see that we ran into trouble because of this CORS problem. In short, the browser intervenes on our behalf and makes sure that our Spring Boot app listening on port 8080 is willing to accept requests from another app listening, or our other app, which is listening on port 8081. So the browser doesn't let JavaScript just make network calls. That's for security's sake. So we essentially, in our Spring Boot app, we need to whitelist this 8081 origin to allow it to make network requests. So that's a protection that's built into the browser that came from a lot of bad security experience. Now in Spring Boot, it's pretty easy to set that up. Of course, I have another live template for that. And let's just unpack what's going on here. We'll work our way from the inside out. So I have this CORS registry. I can give it a pattern. In this case, I'm just giving it the global pattern, so it's going to match on anything. And I'm giving it an array of allowed origins. And included in that array, I intend to include localhost 8081. All right. Now, where does that array come from? Well, if we look up here, here's where we define that string array. And I'm taking advantage of Spring Boot's very rich configuration framework, where we can pull in settings from various sources. It'll look at application properties, it'll look at application YAML, it'll look at environment variables, and it'll try to set this string array based on what it finds. Now, this gives us a lot of flexibility in prototyping, developing, and ultimately deploying. And what I'm going to do here is kill our application. And in the application's configuration, this is just one way to accomplish this. I'm going to go into environment variables. And when we set it as an environment variable, we take the lowercase origin that I want to allow here is localhost 8081. So that is our Vue.js app. Let me restart. So basically, we're saying this Spring Boot app is now allowing JavaScript requests from our localhost 8081 origin. And so now if I refresh this, we get back the API response. So not bad. We've made some progress. We now have a backend API and we have a front-end Vue.js app that's capable of calling that backend API, but we don't want to look at the developer console all day. So now we want to actually visually represent that, and that's where Bootstrap Vue is going to come in for me. So Bootstrap, if you're not familiar with it, it's for responsive web apps. All of the really true graphic web design people that I've met kind of scoff and look down on Bootstrap. As a back-end dweller, I really appreciate Bootstrap because it made somebody like me able to make reasonable looking interfaces for front-end applications. It's got an easy to use layout system. It's got a lot of built-in components, including a progress meter, which we are about to make use of. All right, so next step in our journey here is that we're going to add this progress meter to the app. Now, to do that, the first thing we want to do is make Bootstrap Vue globally available. And so we're going to go into this main.ts file. That is our main TypeScript file. And we're going to put in the calls here that we need to make Bootstrap Vue globally available. So all I did with my IntelliJ Live template was add these lines, and that imports Bootstrap Vue. It also imports the default CSS pages, which I'm very thankful for because I'm terrible with CSS. and then it makes it globally available for use. So that sets the stage for us now to jump back to our app view. And now up here in the template, in between the logo and the hello world message, I'd like to now have a visual progress meter. And so I'm going to do that like so. So this little block is what I just added. And let's also work our way inside out. The core of what's going on here is we have a progress meter and a button. The progress meter uses the B progress tab. That is an integration from Bootstrap Vue, and it binds a value and a max. So the Vue.js bindings are really cool. So this is going to look in our backing class for this view for a property called value and a property called max, and this colon form is what does that binding. Then we have a button, and the expectation is that when we click that advance button, it's going to advance our progress meter. Now we don't actually have that code set up yet, but we're going to do that right now by coming down to our class here. And let's start just by adding the properties, just so we can see this rendered on the screen. So we have max and value. I'm going to set the max to 100. I'm going to set the initial value to 20. And I should be able to see this right away. Really nice working with Vue.js in this mode because I can rapidly check out my application and see what's going on. So here's my nice looking progress meter thanks to Bootstrap Vue, which I would have taken a lot longer to put together if I had to do this on my own. And I can see that I got some errors because this click handler that I'm calling out doesn't exist yet. So it's complaining about that, but at least I have some feedback that it's basically there. So let's flesh this out and add in the function that we need here to make this work properly, and that is our TS progress function. No, that's not the one I wanted. Hold on, demo monster. I want TS advance. There we go. And I can see that this mounted function is not properly formatted. All right, everything's nice and neat. Okay, so max and value, we already had those properties. Now I've added this advance function. Well, what calls that? If we look back at our container up here, I have this click handler that references the advance function. So when I click, it's going to call this advance function. The advance function now makes the API call that we know is now working, and it takes the property from value and passes it in, and then it processes the response and it gets back the response. And then it just does a little bit of ternary math here where if the progress value it gets back is greater than 100, it's going to set it to 0. So this makes our little progress meter wrap around. So this should reset itself. It should get rid of the warnings that we had here. I'm just going to refresh. There we go. And so now I can watch the network view here and I can click advance, and now our progress meter is advancing. And when I get all the way to 100, the next time I click, it wraps around. That's the behavior I wanted. So we can see here that I got back 105, and my little ternary did its job and reset our progress meter. So this is pretty good. We now have an end-to-end application, Vue.js on the front end, communicating with the Spring Boot backend, and we have a nicely rendered component on the page. Pretty good progress so far. Now, there are some downsides to the way that we've architected this application thus far. One is that we have two separate IntelliJ projects, even though this is really represents the same application. Now, I could kind of stitch it together, and I have done that before I got familiar with JHipster, where in my IntelliJ project, I used Maven modules. I had a backend and a front-end module, and I organized it that way. That's fine, and it works. But JHipster doesn't just give us organization, it layers in a lot of features and functionality that we're going to need for nearly every modern SPA web application that we set up. So in addition to bringing the project all under one roof, it also gives us authentication out of the box. Authentication is a first-class citizen with JHipster, and for most modern web apps, you're going to need that. Now, if you're not very familiar with JHipster, it's a free and open source application generator, and by default, JHipster offers you two primary choices for your front end, either React or Angular. But JHipster also has this rich plugin system called Blueprints, and there's a very well supported blueprint for Vue.js. So prior to this presentation, I did a global install for Generator JHipster and Generator JHipster Vue, and that's going to allow me to set up a JHipster Vue project. So first thing I want to do is kind of shut everything down with the examples that we've been using so far. And we're going to get to the point that we're at right now with the JHipster project. And then we're going to go beyond that. So let me get back to my command line. So I'm going to run JHipster. Now, ordinarily to start with a JHipster app, all you do is run JHipster. We're going to give it the blueprints parameter and include Vue.js to tell it up front, we want this to be a Vue.js front end. Now, this is going to kick off and it's going to ask me a couple of questions. So I'm going to have it be a monolithic application. That's fine for my purposes here. I'm going to deploy this application, both front end and back end, to the same place. That's okay. I'm not going to use Webflux. The base name of our, oh, hold on, demo monster. I forgot one little step here. I want to actually start in this folder called Progress App. So before we had Progress API, we had Progress Frontend. Now we're going to have a single app called Progress App. And let me run that again. Monolith. Don't want to use Webflux. And we'll call this our Progress App. And we give it a default package name. You can see I've done this before. So comma fit nerd progress API. I don't want to use the JHipster registry. This is what I was waiting for. So as I said, we have to choose an authentication option. It's a first-class citizen. Now, we could choose to ignore that if we don't care about authentication in our project, but I'm going to choose OAuth. And what we're going to see is that JHipster makes it super easy for us to start out with Keycloak running locally and then switch over to another provider like Okta. And it's not just a shameless plug for Okta, although it is that, but it's also to demonstrate how easy it is to start out running locally and to switch over to a cloud provider like Okta if you don't want to run the local infrastructure yourself. Now from here, I'm going to make some atypical selections. So for our demonstration purposes, we're not going to have a database. We're not going to have a cache. In real life, you probably would have those things. I'm going to stick with Maven. And then I'm just going to leave the defaults for everything else. I'm not going to select any other optional packages. You'll notice for framework, Vue.js is our only option because we gave it that blueprint as the command line parameter. So Vue.js is what I want. I'll let it be a default. And ordinarily, I would enable internationalization, but I'm not going to in this case, just to keep things simple. No marketplace. Okay, now that we've gotten past all that, it's going to generate our JHipster application. Now, this takes a little bit of time, so I'm going to do my smoke and mirrors trick again and open up my JHipster application from my preset folder where I've already set up Progress App and JHipster has already done all of its business. And so I'm just going to select the POM again and open as a project, and we should be ready to go. All right. Let's fire up this boilerplate JHipster app just to see that everything's working. I have a Spring Boot backend that I called Progress App. I'm going to fire that up. We'll wait for that to start. All right, there it goes. And now we have the JHipster banner instead of the Spring Boot banner. I'm going to jump over to my terminal and I'm going to do what it's telling me to do, which is npm start. And that will actually launch JHipster frontend, our Vue.js frontend on port 9000, and it will launch a browser window. That'll take just a moment. There we go. All right, so here we go. Boilerplate JHipster. A couple things we have out of the box is authentication. So this is a nice Vue.js front end, and authentication is ready to go. Now, by default, it's configured to use Keycloak. And one of the really handy things about JHipster is that it gives us a Keycloak server as a Docker container. So I'm running Docker on my Mac over here, and prior to starting, I fired up Docker. Wait, I'm going the wrong way. I fired up Docker with Keycloak so that I'm all ready to go here. So I already have OAuth functionality built into my application thanks to JHipster's default Docker setup. And so I can actually go authenticate. And now my JHipster app knows I'm in an authenticated state. So this is really civilized, really easy, and I really appreciate that that auth is a first-class citizen. Now on our back end, I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to get set up to hit a backend API. Now, it doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to go and remedy that right now as I dig into source main Java. And just organization-wise, we have source main and we have Java like we're used to, but we also have web app. And so we have our Vue.js app all under one roof here. But in Java, I'm going to open up our progress app. There's more stuff in here now. But I'm going to go ahead and put in the same thing that I did before. So let me make this a little bigger. But this code hasn't changed at all. I'm going to resolve my imports because it would automatically resolve imports if there's only one, but there's a bunch, so it didn't. Now I can restart. And so now I have an API endpoint just like I did before. The difference now is that it is protected by default. So when I try to go and access it now, I'm going to get a 401 error because I have to be authenticated in order to interact with the API. That is a good thing. We're going to come back to that in just a minute when we see it working from our Vue.js app. Speaking of, let's jump back into our Vue.js app and let's start where we started before and just make sure that our Vue.js app can talk to the backend at all. Now, this is slightly different, and it's different in a good way. When we open up app.vue, we have our template code here, and the backend class is now separated into its own file. And this is a good thing. This gives us a nice separation of concerns. We have our Vue template in one file and our backend class in another. And just like we did before, I'm going to add in the mounted function just to make sure that it's possible for us to interact with our backend. I just need to import Axios so that it can communicate. And here's where JHipster really shines over rolling your own. When I use a relative path like this, JHipster is pre-configured to proxy that request. That is, JHipster, we're making this request from our Vue.js app, which we got to on localhost 9000. JHipster recognizes this API call as being a backend call and proxies it to our Spring Boot app, which is still running on the backend on port 8080. that alleviates the need for us to deal with all that cores business that we had to deal with earlier. We just want to make sure that we're using these relative paths, and it enforces and automatically works with authentication. Let's see what I'm talking about here. So let me first log out. Okay, and let me refresh the page. And we can see that it attempted to make this progress call. So that's good. It's attempting to make the progress call, but it failed because it's unauthorized because we're not authenticated. We can't make backend API calls without being authenticated. Let's go ahead and authenticate. And it looks like it kept my session from before. And now if I look at my progress call, hold on. That's what I want. No, bear with me a second here. Demo monster. Hold on, one more time. Where are you? There it is. Why is it responding that way? Maybe I broke something. Oh, I had a network error. Interesting. All right, not sure what's going on there just yet, but we will figure it out as we go here, hopefully. Let me do this. Let's try the famous incognito window. Hopefully that'll be helpful to us. Oops, I do have to spell localhost properly though. All right, let me sign in. There I can see that progress failed. And now, did progress succeed over here? No, still getting a proxy error. Okay, not 100% sure what's going on there, but we will figure it out together. All right, so jumping back over to app components. Interesting. I shouldn't have to kill it, but I'm gonna. It should automatically launch a browser. In theory. Come on, JHipster, you can do it. There we go. And let's see. Oh. Bear with me a sec here. Technical difficulties, but we will figure it out. And if not, we'll move on. I'm sure I forgot one little detail somewhere. Why is it returning a web page? Did I screw up my API call over here? API progress. I'm looking in chat now. Need a leading slash. Shouldn't need a leading slash. It's supposed to be relative. Did I? Oh my goodness. Come on, we're supposed to be professionals here. I forgot the REST controller. See, this is why I need templates and to not rely on my own memory. But I think we got there. All right. I have a high degree of confidence. Okay. One more time. All right, this is better. Good. Now it's recognizing that we're not logged in and we're getting an error, which I expect to get when I'm not logged in. Let's try this one more time. There we go. But for an annotation, I knew it would be something silly. All right. Now, this is good progress because by taking this layered approach, we've now proven that we can make an API call in an authenticated state. And so now I can layer back in my progress meter to be able to make this a little more nice to look at. Now, what I want to have happen is I want my progress meter to appear between the Welcome Java Hipster and this is your home page. And in order to do that, I want to go and access the home page, which I happen to know is under core home in this JHipster Vue.js app. So I'm going to load up the home template. And here we can see Welcome Java Hipster. This is your home page. And so I want to now make things better. I don't want to just plug in a bunch of, 10 lines of tags here. Really, what I want to do is have a reusable component that I'm going to call progress meter. So this is the goal, and we're going to work our way toward that. And in order to do that, we want to create a standalone Vue.js component. So I'm going to jump over to shared here on the left, and I'm going to go and create a new directory that we'll call progress. And in that directory, I'm going to create two new files. First one is called progress.vue. And in keeping with the best practices here, I'm going to have a separate progress.component.ts file. Just setting up the scaffolding here. So let's jump over to Progress View and put in our template. So fortunately for everyone, I do have a live template for that. Pretty straightforward and hopefully looks a little bit familiar. Here's the core of what's going on. We have our B progress tag. We saw that before. We have our data bindings for value and max, and we have our advance reference. It's slightly different now. We have this V on click, which is a handy Vue.js way to do it. And now we have an external class file called progress component TS. Now, what's different here is we have these divs around the progress tag, and that's because for whatever reason, the Vue.js blueprint brought in some of Bootstrap Vue, but not all of it. So we do have the B progress tag, but we have to use vanilla Bootstrap div tags in order to get the row and column layout that we want. Now, why that decision was made exactly, I don't know. I'm going to ask at some point and maybe make a contribution to the JHipster project to include all the other Bootstrap Vue tags, but it's not too bad. It's still pretty civilized. Now, over here in components, I'm going to set up my TS progress code. So I have a class called progress. I have the properties that we've seen before. I have the advanced function that we've seen before. And now this is all nice and encapsulated into its own reusable component. So now to fulfill on the dream of having this progress meter tag in our home view, there's just a little bit more ceremony that we need to go through to make it recognize this new progress component. And to do that, we're going to bring it into the home components TS.
Hey, Micah, you may want to make some of your text a little bit bigger.
Ah, okay. I meant to remember to do that, and maybe I forgot. Hopefully this is big enough now. Thanks for the feedback. That is important. All right. So here I'm going to import progress from, and now I can reference it. This @ symbol tells Vue.js that this is within the project. So from our shared folder, progress and progress.vue, this is our component that we just created. Now the component annotation, this is one of the nice things about TypeScript. We get annotations, just like we're used to in Java. And the component annotation takes a components object, and this is where we create our custom tag. We want it to be called progress meter, and we're going to bind it to this progress object that we just imported above. So it's this key value pair business here that gives me my progress meter tag. And now this is all tied together. And if I didn't screw anything up, we should be able to see it now in our JHipster page. It's rebuilding, it's reconnecting, and voila, there is our now nicely encapsulated progress component. Now, there's one problem with this, and that is we know that the backend API only works if you're authenticated. And so when I sign out, I still see this progress meter. And if I attempt to advance it, we get stuck because we're not authenticated. Really, I don't want to show the progress meter at all if I'm not in an authenticated state. Well, JHipster and Vue.js make that super easy for us. We have this v-if attribute, and we have an authenticated property that is recognized. And what this is saying is only render the progress meter if we're authenticated. So with that one little attribute, now I take care of this problem. The page will refresh in just a sec. So now when I'm not authenticated, I don't see the progress meter at all. When I am authenticated, the progress meter is back and I can interact with it. If I sign out, the progress meter goes away. Pretty cool. All right. Last thing to do today is we want to switch over from Keycloak to Okta. And there's a super easy way for us to do that by using the Heroku Okta add-on. Now, there's more than one way to skin a cat. You can go to developer.okta.com and create a developer org and get everything set up. You have to get an email. You have to change your password. The Heroku Okta add-on, if you're already a Heroku user, the Heroku Okta add-on alleviates the need to do all that because it does that for you. Let's take a look at that. So over here, I'm already logged into my Heroku account, and I'm just going to go and create a new app. And I'm going to call it Okta KCJUG -1. I have an Okta KCJUG already set just in case we get the demo monster. I'm going to go and create this app. If you've never seen Heroku before, it's super nice. It's a great, they have a free tier. I'm not affiliated with Heroku in any way, but I really dig it. Now, this app that I created is empty. It doesn't do anything yet. There's no code deployed. There's no add-ons. What we're going to do here is go and add the Okta add-on, and I can search for it. And I'm going to go and provision it. Now, what's happening in the background here is all stuff you could do manually, but it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It's allocating an Okta org, and in that Okta org, it's creating an OpenID Connect app with everything that we need to wire up our JHipster app to it and switch from Keycloak to here. So the provisioning is now done. I also get single sign-on from Heroku over to Okta. That's part of how the Heroku add-on works. And so if you've never seen it before, this is the Okta dashboard. And from here, I can see that Heroku has already created 2 OpenID Connect apps for me. And the one that I care about for now is this web app. In the web app general settings, I have information about the client ID and the client secret, which I'm going to make use of in just a second. Also, in my Heroku definition, let me make this a little bigger, it has all of these environment variables set up, and I can make use of those right away. The 3 that I care about are the issuer, the secret, and the client ID. And I've just copied each of those. And now going back to my JHipster app, under resources and config, I have my application YAML for my JHipster app. And if we scroll down a bit, we can see that OAuth 2 is pre-configured to connect to Keycloak, which I have running in my Docker container. Now we're going to change that over to Okta simply by replacing these three values: our client ID and secret and our issuer. So just by changing over these three values, and I'm going to restart my Spring Boot backend. And I'm not entirely sure that I need to, but just to be safe, I'm going to restart my Vue.js frontend. If you're familiar with it, this is going to use the authorization code flow, which is the most complex, but also the most secure of the OAuth 2 flows. We have a lot of great posts on our blog if you're not familiar with OAuth and want to get more familiar with it. Okay. So now I'm ready to sign in, but I'm going to run into a problem which we're going to be able to resolve pretty easily. And that is part of this OAuth flow is that we redirect to Okta to authenticate, and then Okta redirects back to our app. The problem is that Okta doesn't just redirect anywhere. The redirect URI that we want to use has to be whitelisted. So I'm going to grab this redirect URI, which is preset up by JHipster for us. And I'm going to go back to my Okta OpenID Connect app, and I'm simply going to add that redirect URI as one of the allowed redirect URIs in the list here. While I'm at it, I'm also going to add the logout redirect URI because that also has to be whitelisted. And I know our JHipster app is just going to go back to the front door after we log out. So I'll do that all at once so that we don't keep getting errors. Now that I've done that, I can jump back to the front door of JHipster. And actually, let me go ahead and I'm going to log out of Okta just so that we can see the experience of having to log in here. And I'm going to capture this default email and password that was set up for us. All right, so back in JHipster land, I'm going to sign in, and now we have a slightly different experience. Now we're redirected over to Okta. Now, just as a side note, you can skin this login experience to have the look and feel of your own brand. You can have a custom subdomain so that your users never see okta.com, but this is what the default looks like. And so I am now going to paste in that username and password, which is auto-generated for me. Now I'm signed in. This is a one-time setup. Since it's the first time I'm logging in, I have to give it a security question. Now we redirect back to the app, and now I'm back able to use our progress meter. So pretty cool. It was easy, relatively easy, I would say, to switch over from Keycloak to Okta. We now have our our full stack application, Vue.js on the front end, Spring Boot on the back end, a authentication protected API which we can interact with, and it was all pretty civilized to get going. All right, now what we didn't get to, because this is already a long talk, is some important topics. Vuex is for state management. That's a really great part of Vue.js. So if you need to maintain state, like maybe across components, we want our progress meter to always show the same value, we can use Vuex for state management. We kind of stepped over JPA and JSR 107 for persistence and cache. Those are all part of a normal kind of full stack application. Also, we didn't cover deployment. And again, not affiliated with Heroku, but it's really easy to deploy Java, Spring Boot, JHipster apps to Heroku, and they have a great free tier. All right, so with that, sorry for the couple of hiccups that we ran into. Thank you for your time and attention. Here's the QR code if you want to go and snag this presentation and all of the resources that we used with it. And we got time for, hopefully we have time for Q&A if I didn't gas on too much. How are we doing there?
I think we're doing fine. So yeah, looking at the chat right now, not seeing too many questions yet, but yeah, really great presentation, and we'll also get the all the links put into the description and also emailed out as well, so everybody can find and check them out. Yeah, let's see. If you definitely have any questions, please go ahead and ask them now. Maybe actually go and type it now. But yeah, that was a really great presentation. I mean, to go from having nothing here to now having an application with a front end, a back end that has authentication and everything, and OAuth and all that. That's a lot within just about an hour. So that's really cool. I know Vue.js is maybe about the level of JavaScript that I can get to anymore. It looks relatively simple compared to so many others. I remember kind of understanding Angular back in the day, and now like Angular.js or whatever Angular 2. I don't know what it is. Like I just remember looking at it, I'm like, I have no idea what's going on anymore. So
Yeah, I think we're at Angular 7 or maybe later, but same thing. I'm afraid of Angular. My colleague Matt Rabel, who you may know, is always trying to get me to jump into Angular, and I just haven't done it. But maybe I will this year. I'm pretty satisfied with Vue.js though.
nice. So we do have a question. So does JHipster support interaction with a reactive web app out of the box?
Fabulous question. I believe the answer to that is yes. When one of the settings that I stepped over was it asks you if you want to support Webflux in your JHipster application. I said no, and the default is no. What I'm not so JHipster definitely supports reactive. What I'm not 100% sure of is if the Vue.js Blueprint supports reactive. I know React and Angular do for sure.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah, and I do apologize for some of those audio issues. We're still learning. This is our second iteration for KCJUG and doing a live stream, and so that was definitely all on my side and kind of some of those issues getting that stuff set up. And sorry for some of the audio stuff. So hopefully we'll have that better resolved for next month and months going forward. But all right. Whoop. Let's see. Hold on one second. Okay, so not directly talked about in your presentation, but do you have any suggestions for how to handle the secret key without checking it in?
Yeah, you never, ever, ever want to check it into your repo. But this is one of the great things about the Spring Boot configuration framework is that you can prototype all day long with a development secret key embedded in your application properties. Just don't ever check in application properties. And then when you deploy it to Heroku or anywhere else, you can have it set in your deployment environment as an environment variable, and then Spring Boot will just pick up on that. You could also store it in a database. There's a lot of different places that you could store it in your production deployment environment without ever having to have it in your GitHub repo. For all of the demos that I do, I always just have it set as an environment variable in my Heroku app, and then I don't have to have it anywhere near the code, and Spring Boot just picks it up.
Great, great. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, always want to make sure you avoid putting any of that stuff in. I've definitely done that by accident a few times, and then like GitHub or something, I get like a little nastygram back saying like, "Hey, it looks like you have a password in here," and like then you have to go regenerate it because obviously there's the history's there forever, and you just assume someone got it. So, all
Yeah.
right. So I think that's it. Thank you again, Micah, for joining us. If you have any questions that you were wanting to ask but didn't get a chance to, definitely ping Micah at a fit nerd on Twitter. Also, and we'll get all your contact info as well as a description, and also add it into the meetup description as well. So, wait, actually, and yeah. So I think we're at the end of it. So thank you again, and we'll see you next month. See ya.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me. Later, y'all.